Hey, Mark, do you know what day it is?
I think it's Friday. Oh, wait, it's Rapid Fire Friday.
Listen, we can do a lot better than that.
1, 2, 3, 4.
So we might call this Rapid Fire?
Rapid Fire.
Rapid
Rapid
Fire.
Fire.
Rapid Fire. Rapid Fire.
Fire.
Rapid Fire.
Rapid Fire question.
Yes.
How should we think about short-term missions? It seems like oftentimes the money spent on plane tickets alone to foreign countries to send people there for a few weeks could accomplish more by just sending the money to support the cause through charities and churches already in the country. Thank you, Michelle Tripoli, for your question.
Yeah, I think it's really hard to paint with a broad brush, but I think it's really important to talk to the people who are receiving the short-term missionary people, right? So one of the things I've seen is Americans come and have expectations for how things should go. For a small thing, an example, an American missionary group goes from here to a small town in Mexico, and they don't recognize how much work it is for those people to have them all stay in their homes, to feed them, and to do all the work associated with hosting them. And these people will give all that they can for that kind of experience for the Americans, but it's a big sacrifice. So what I would encourage is there are a lot of short-term missions that are worth it and a lot of short-term missions that are not. And to me, it's based on, are we serving, and you have to have a relationship with the people in another country. Are we serving these folks in ways that are really genuinely helpful, or are we going as Americans to get an experience? Because those are two different kinds of trips, right? I would much rather have a short-term mission trip where you can build a long-term relationship and they can tell you for real and for certain that what you're doing is helpful, right? And like an example that I remember years and years ago is there was an American church that wanted to go down and do Vacation Bible School. And the expectation was that the receiving church would build like a little puppet stage and then print out flyers to pass out to the community. They didn't have the funds to do that, but they did it anyway to please the Americans. That's dangerous. That kind of work right there is dangerous. Now, that's where we have to have a good enough relationship on the other side to make sure that what we're doing is actually helpful and not just something that looks good on Instagram.
So being good stewards of the resources that we're giving.
Absolutely. And then by the same token, there's a ton of short-term mission trips that do a bunch of good. Yeah. And so I know of a young lady in our church who went from here to Brazil to serve at a Johnny and Friends special needs camp in Brazil. I think that's outstanding, right? Yeah. That's wonderful. She has expertise. She went down, had a wonderful experience from all I've heard. And I think that's great because she's providing a real service down there and helping them in real tangible ways. Yeah. So that's a short answer. So if you really talk to somebody not from the United States and see if it's really helpful, because I've also seen Americans that go down and gain conversions, but they get people to pray prayers, but they're not encouraging these people to be added to a local church. And that's going to do way more harm than good. And so I think one of the other realities is if we go someplace doing short-term missions, there has to be an association with a local church in that area so that when people get converted or want to start participating somewhere in the spiritual life, in some kind of spirituality, they need a local church to connect to. Otherwise, we just get converts who are just thrown out there and they're exposed and vulnerable, and that's dangerous.
Love it. Okay, moving on to the next one. This one's from Bob Campbell. Thank you for your question. It was relevant to radical conversions and growing up in the church. He was basically explaining his struggle with not realizing his salvation is a blessing because it sounds like
he grew up in the church. Yeah, right, exactly.
And I did not.
Not our church, but the church at large. Yeah, right, exactly.
So ironically, we thought, okay, well, Rich Richardson, a.k.a. Coleman, he grew up in the church. Yeah. And I did not.
Correct.
It'll be I've been in the church for 3 years this month.
And it's all a new experience to you.
It's very new, yeah. Like that's why a lot of your references are like, I mean, not specifically phone ringing off the hook, but just like some of your funny Christian cultural things are funny because I've never heard of them, and they seem ridiculous, coming to faith as an adult.
Right, exactly.
We were kind of thinking about just sharing the differences in our perspectives from what Christianity was and what our walk was. What do you think? How should we go about that?
I think it's good to remember that regeneration is a miracle for either people on the street or people who grew up in the church, right? And so
one isn't better than the other.
One's not better than the other, because like a lot of times I'll talk to people who are radically saved and they wish they grew up in the church.
I can find myself falling into that.
And then the other side, people who grew up in the church wish they had a testimony that was radical.
He used Paul as an example. He's like, Paul had that radical conversion.
Well, and Paul was once, Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles.
Yeah.
Utterly unique. He's the only one who had the risen Jesus preach the gospel to him. So, his was radical and different.
The most radical.
The most radical. But at the same time, I get what he's saying, because if you're around the biblical teaching for a long time, it just you get numb to it. You get like inoculated to it. And it doesn't seem very amazing. And so I get that. And there's the other thing is there are a lot of people who grew up in the church that know the message of the Bible but are not saved. And they don't know it. And so like that's where there is a danger to growing up in the church. You can think, man, I know all this stuff, but yet you're not living for Jesus. Yeah, I'm sympathetic for people I don't have a day I can even look back to and say, hey, I was saved on such and such date. I have no idea. You probably can look back to the month you were saved in, right?
The day.
What day?
March 27th, 2021.
All right. So you can look back, boom, and there you got it, right? We just celebrated your what is this, 3rd anniversary. So that's outstanding. So it's just different, And so I get his question, but I think we can be grateful for the way the Lord put us, in whatever path or journey that he had us on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Speaking to like radical conversions, like my perspective was just, it was so foreign. I never grew up hearing the gospel. I could read something like Romans 8, verse 9. You, however, are not in the flesh, but in the spirit. In fact, the Spirit of God dwells in you. Just reading things like that when I first got saved almost didn't make sense, but then the gravity of it was so big that I couldn't comprehend.
Right.
And you're having that turning point moment where like almost everything you thought was wrong, and then going back to pick out like things you thought that were right, but you're just going to naturally assume they were wrong because everything's completely different. And it wasn't anything that I was seeking out. I was running, just to get a quick testimony, I was running away from the Lord. I never met a faithful Christian. I never met someone who could defend why they believed what they believed. And I was in all kinds of sin of the flesh willingly. I also desired it and loved it. And I'm using Christian words now that I wouldn't have used that.
We definitely understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. So just to look at like God snatched me from my unrighteousness and my life that would have eventually led to death and brought me into new life. And it's just a miracle. So I guess I can relate in a way. I feel like there's a fire under me, and not always, but a lot of times, because not that I think I can make up for the way I lived before, but because I understand the grace and the sovereignty that the Lord gave me as a free gift, not by anything I earned or chose, and how that has transformed my life, and from my relationships to how I think about money,
everything, right?
To how I spend my time, every little thing. And more things to come as Scripture continues to influence me and edify me. And
totally.
I just remember certain passages that I would read 5 or 6 times, but then the 7th time I read it, I would just be crying, like just, I finally can understand what this means. And the Spirit gave me understanding, and just people in my life have been a blessing. And I'm someone who would consider themselves not a very emotional person. It makes me very emotional.
Well, and you know what? That's the reality here is the church needs radical conversions like you to bring the fire. For those of us who've been around decades, it's good to have new conversions. That's a sign of health. And so like we want that.
Yeah.
And at the same time, those of us who've grown up in the church, we need to know there's a danger to being exposed to truth all the time.
Yeah.
There's a ton of people I grew up with that were in the church that are not now.
See, I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
sure.
That's-
Unfortunately, I will. It's just the last thought on mine. It's like, okay, Lord, the mindset that it's been consistent, at least for the last 2 years or so, was, okay, you've done so much for me.
Yeah.
What is it that you have me to do with the rest of my life? And
Yeah.
that's the question that
Well, and
I'll
that,
spend the rest of my life answering.
and that's an inspiration for all of us. So good question, Bob.
Yes, thank you so much. So that wraps up our Rapid Fire Friday. Feel free to reach out with questions. We love you. Keep the questions coming. If radical conversions is something you're interested in, you can email us. But also, if you see me, just pull me aside. I would love to tell you more details.
Yeah.
Not on this podcast, but
All right. Yeah. Thanks, everybody.
Wanna hear you go.